this really was a timely upgrade of the old mainline classic. Hi there to you, it's really great to see you. Welcome back to the channel up here in the loft on Weir Yard. I'm Jenny Kirk, and today I want to personally thank all of the Patreons who've made the following video possible with their generosity over the last month. I really thought it was time that I explicitly showed you where the Patreon money goes. And today, well, I've got a locomotive that is one which a lot of people have suggested that I should be reviewing. And thanks to the Patreons, I've been able to do just that today. So I'm really pleased to have finally got hold of one of the all-new tooled Bachmann J72 locomotives. And we're going to be doing a full review on this and also do a how-to DCC fitting guide, just to help you out on how to DCC fit your own model. And if you do like the look of today's model, then we do have an affiliate link in the description box down below that takes you over to Rails of Sheffield to be able to take a look at the different livery versions that they've got available if you want to pick up your own model today. Today's video comes to you in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts, and with additional support from Billy's Replacement Speakers. Check out our full range of merch in the merch box down below that include those all new great Billy's Replacement Speakers t-shirts, hoodies, die-cut stickers, mugs, and a whole host of other items as well. But now I'm really pleased to show you this Patreon special locomotive, and let's go and take a look and see, has it really lived up to expectations? The J72 is a locomotive that's been a part of the Bachmann range since the very inception of Bachmann UK. In fact, it goes back a lot further than that, going back to the days of mainline, and I believe it was pretty much one of the very first locomotives to have been made from the Cada factory out in Hong Kong, which spawned eventually the whole Bachmann UK range. It lasted in the Bachmann range up until comparatively recently, but it was definitely getting very long in the tooth. Bachmann undertook a program of upgrading all of their models, looking to add in, at the very least, the ability to easily DCC fit them. But the J72 was one of the locomotives that had a split chassis design. Now, Bachmann could have gone along the route of just putting in a completely upgraded chassis and leaving the body of the locomotive intact, which is a little bit similar to what they tried with the V2. But in this instance, I'm really glad that they decided to bite the bullet and just go whole hog to retool from scratch a full modern spec J72 tank locomotive. The only potential criticism was that they didn't take the opportunity to also allow the tooling to produce the quite similar J71 type locomotive, but there's quite possibly very good reasons why they weren't able to do this. Now, this particular locomotive is one which I've been able to buy to be able to do this review entirely out of the generosity of Patreons to this channel. And I thought that it would be a good opportunity to just make light of this and show that that's where the money goes and that it does allow me to make the videos that you want to see. I know a lot of people have suggested that the J72 tank locomotive was something that I should get, and thanks to the generosity of Patreons, I have now been able to do that. The class itself was very long-lived, a bit like the Bachmann model, built over a span of 54 years under 3 railway company ownerships, the North Eastern Railway, NER, and even BR built a few, and there's a short potted history on the back. Now, one of these locomotives does also survive in preserved form, and I believe that that was done as a Collectors Club special version, but this is from actually the main range release. It's 31-063, And this is the locomotive in its original Northeastern Railway lined green, or at least that's what Bachmann thought. But I did speak to them at Worley a couple of years ago, and what they said was that the photograph that they had been working from, obviously given the age, was black and white, and they mistook the livery on the locomotive to actually being the Northeastern Railway lined green, when in fact it turned out that after they'd done the livery examples, that what they were actually looking at was a workshop grey locomotive that had been painted that way purely for doing the black and white photographs of the day. But by that point, they had pre-orders in for this model, and this particular livery, even though it did turn out to be completely fictitious, was proving so popular that Bachmann actually said, you know what, why not? If people want it, we are quite happy to make it. And that's a great example of Bachmann actually listening to what people want. Now there's also a little bag of extra detailing, and we've got what appear to be cab doors, all painted and lined up so you can actually fill the gaps, fit them in. We've also got an assortment of lamps, and we've got the 3-link couplings and hooks too, but I'm going to put them to one side. I don't tend to fit a lot of this detail. Now the locomotive itself is fitted with a Next 18 decoder socket, and later on in this video we're going to be doing a full step-by-step review of how to fit this locomotive and get it set up on DCC using the Trainomatic Next 18 decoder. And we've got a link down below to the UK and European stockists Tramfabrique just to assist you in finding your own version of this decoder. But for now, let's take a really good look at this model. It does size up really, really well, and one thing that's very apparent is that there is a great deal of weight to this model, which actually, given its small size, is pretty credible. This particular livery is really, really nice for showing up all of the detail on this model. It's also available in BR Early Black, Late Black, and also LNER Black. But for me, this was the livery that really stood out. And of course, as I said before, there's also a special Bachmann Collectors Club version, which at the time of filming has sold out. My first impressions of this locomotive are very positive. I really like this metal running plate, and I can feel it's metal. It's one of those things, there's no flex to it, and what's more, it sits really nice and flush along the full length of the model. When I place my ruler up against the running plate, that's good and straight. There's no bow at all on that, and I'm quite pleased with it. The tanks and the bunker fit perfectly along there. There's no gap whatsoever. And I also really like the space underneath the boiler. Although one thing that you can see, it's not quite apparent on this side because of some of the gear that goes through, but on the other side you can just make out the splitting point in the boiler. It's nice that they've got that really low down, but this livery is just a little bit cruel, and it does show that up just a little bit. One thing I do like though, which if we do peer it down into this space, is there really is a big space underneath the boiler. These tanks are separately fitted, and that means that it looks just like how the prototype looks, and that really is important. The dome is firmly in place, as is the chimney, and all of this handrails on the model are metal. They're pretty fine, and again, robust, and are standing up to all of my prodding and poking really well. The front face of the locomotive is realised well. You can see there all the detail picked out in silver, and again, it's probably the cruelest livery for showing up any potential flaws, but that really does look good. There's just a tiny amount of silver, just look like they've spread out just onto the black. But from most viewing angles, and bear in mind what you're seeing on your screen is comparatively huge compared to the model, it's not too bad. We've got this very characteristic Northeastern Railway smokebox dart, and that is a separately applied part. Really nice. Lamp bracket up on the top. Pretty robust. And then we move back, we've got a wealth of detail on top of the splashers, and then to the tank tops. We've got the breathers picked out in the appropriate body colour. The tank fillers, they actually look really nice. They are separately fitted parts, and they are actually quite nicely firm in there. We've also got the rack just at the back there, which on the real locomotive, fire irons would be stored along the top of the tank, and it's an option for an additional detailing pack if you wanted to embellish your locomotive. Safety valves are accurate, as is the whistle, and they feel like they're made of metal. They are quite robust. They're standing up to some good prodding and poking quite well. The cab front, really nice. We've got the flush glazing, and again, the glazing does look nice and flat. We don't get that kind of fishbowl effect around the edges. It does seem to work out quite well. Looking to the inside of the cab, this is always the area where you can kind of just try and check and see where the compromises have been made. And it's difficult for me I can't actually tell if there's a solid glazing bar across the back. But if I can't tell, then to be honest, it's doing its job. However, they've managed to get that flush glazing. We do have a wealth of backhead detail, which is quite difficult for me to show up on this camera. But certainly, believe me, with the naked eye, it does look really nice in there. It's a surprisingly roomy cab and plenty of room to embellish it with a crew if you so choose. The back of the cab too is nicely picked out. There's again quite a lot of nice detail in there. The glazing on the rear porthole windows does look a little bit thick, but actually they've disguised it quite well. And I really do like all of the rest of the accoutrements at the back of the cab. They all seem to be exactly where they need to be. The back of the cab is picked out in this somewhat strange black, but that's in keeping with the livery. The gold picks out the edges of the porthole windows really, really nicely. And then we've got this heaped coal load, which feels like it's fixed in place, feels like it's actually made of metal, doesn't look too bad. And it's nicely heaped, but not so heaped as to look a bit peculiar. And we've got those greedy rails around the edge, and I suspect it's part of the additional weight that really does give this locomotive a good punch in terms of adhesive pull. Brake rigging on the locomotive is factory fitted, and that does save an awful lot of fiddling around. We've got pickups on all 6 wheels, and just pulling the wheels from one side to the other, I can just make out there that I am going to probably need to just adjust that ever so slightly, although we'll see just how well it performs on the track. Front wheels, they're fine. The pickups do seem to actually stay in touch, as do the rear wheels. So we've got all 6 wheels picking up from the track, and then we've got these connecting rods, which they're not fluted, they are fairly flat, but Bachmann have captured the cranked shape there really quite nicely, and the nuts that hold them in aren't overpowering. And you can also see the air gap that just there up and through the underside of the boiler. And we've got these quite robust steps. They feel like they're made of plastic, but they're not prone to coming off. And that's something I found with the Bachmann J72, that the steps could be just a little bit prone of breaking free and coming off. The weakness being the bond between plastic and metal, but we don't seem to be getting that kind of a problem with this model. Looking down the chimney, I can't see the bottom. It looks just right. It's one of my big bugbears with locomotives. If you can see the kind of plastic bottom, then it really does ruin the look of a locomotive, because you're going to be looking down on it an awful lot when it's running. So it's one of the areas that is probably most visible. The buffers themselves are all fully sprung, nicely turned metal, and actually the spring is not massively springy, they're not too hard, but they don't get stuck inside the shanks, and when you give them a pull, they are nice and firmly on there. Same for those on the back, both sprung, fairly free moving, and nice and firmly in place. The couplings are contained within slimline tension locks, so you can easily remove these to either change them for a different coupling or run the locomotive without a coupling at one end, or indeed the other if you want to go for something like a 3-link coupling, or indeed just want to have this in a display cabinet. The profile of the wheels is captured just right. I know that the older mainline version of this model did look just a little bit wrong on the wheels, and this captures the look of the real prototype really quite well. Now, the green finish on the wheels on this side looks to me to be reasonably okay, but one of the areas that I have picked up on is if we look very closely at the wheels on this side, you can see that the paint hasn't quite adhered to the bosses properly, and in particular the middle and front wheel just has what looks to be a bit of a chip in that lime green paint, and that is a little bit of a disappointment. The rest of the finish though is supreme, and you can see there the lining and the picking out of the letters, and the number 2173 is really nice. We've got that red and white drop shadowing from the gold of the lettering, and it really does bring that lettering to life. Boiler bands are straight and true. I don't see any problems with smudging. It's really just lining up just right. And actually, if we go to the front, where the top and the bottom of the boiler match up, the banding does at least make it across there, lining both sides up perfectly. We've also on the wheels got a very subtle white banding just around the tyres, and I can happily report that on every single wheel this is exactly where it should be, so we don't get that kind of weird oscillating motion when the train is in motion. The cab roof describes that correct slightly flattened arc, and on the top we've got the rain strips and just a suggestion of that access hatch, although that is actually quite a flat and almost not there kind of detailing. It's subtle, I guess it does the job, but compared to the rest of the locomotive it just seemed just a little bit too simple, if in my view. On the back of the bunker, again, that lining really does stand out. We've got the metal handrails, and we've also got that metal body colour lamp bracket, and that's actually really quite robust. I do quite like that. And there's an additional step to one side as well. On the buffer beams, the lining continues, and we've got a whole wealth of lettering there for Class E1, and then we've got the locomotive's number, nicely picked out in that gold with the different coloured drop shadowing. Now, I would recommend putting in the coupling hooks, because that does look a bit glaring without it, and actually on the front too, I think it's something that the model would benefit from having the coupling hook in place, and maybe that's something that I would think would be far more used to the average modeler than having a full 3-link coupling representation on a hook in the pack for the modeler to fit. But actually, this is quite a small model and it's not really a big deal breaker. The running qualities of this locomotive on DC out of the box are really nice and smooth. I had no issues whatsoever. It didn't show any kind of tight spots, and actually, even notwithstanding that one of those 6-wheel pickups didn't quite touch the wheel at the extremities of travel, this did not manifest itself as any kind of issue running on DC. On DCC, the locomotive was equally sure-footed. It was a really stellar performer on Weir Yard, handling all of those curves and gradients with comparative ease, and it did not seem to be hindered in the amount of rolling stock that it could pull, although on the extreme 5% gradient on a curve, it was probably about as compromised as some of the other locomotives that we have run on Weir Yard, but that really is quite a challenging climb. Overall, I was really pleased to add this locomotive to my collection. This very eye-catching Northeastern Railway green locomotive may not be prototypical, but certainly I'm really quite pleased that Bachmann have added this to the range. Don't forget that if you really do like this model, or indeed want to go for the model in a slightly more toned down version in BR Early Black, Late Black, and also NER livery, then we've got an affiliate link down below that takes you to Rails of Sheffield to be able to take a look at what they've got on sale and to pick up a model for your collection today. The locomotive also features a firebox flicker effect, and with the Trainomatic decoder installed, this can be accessed on F3 and F4. Now, the reason for the two function keys is simply that F3 turns on a red light and F4 turns on an amber light, and these can be mix and matched. However, if you wish to set up a flickering effect, this does require some of the CVs to be changed. And it is a shame in a way that Bachmann haven't gone down the route of using an onboard piece of circuitry just to mean that those CVs don't need to be tweaked to be able to actually set up a realistic firebox flicker effect. That said, the brightness on this firebox effect is actually pretty good and is visible at normal viewing distances, even under regular lighting in the room. And that is actually a lot better than we've seen from some other models where they're actually so dim as to be really not useful at all. When it comes to DCC fitting, we recommend the use of the Trainomatic Next 18 decoder. It's really nice and small, and it does also give you the option to add to it a smart power pack with the greatest of ease in the unlikely event that you feel that you need just that little bit something extra to keep your model rolling. We're going to go through step by step now how to DCC fit this model, and for this the only tools you're really probably going to need are trusty jeweler's screwdrivers. Mine look a bit grubby because they're 40 odd years old and they've been worked really hard. Most of that is actually a slight bit of surface rust from things like exposing them to solder flux and not being too bothered about cleaning the flux off afterwards, and they've also got a healthy dusting of things like glue and weathering powders, but actually this is what working tools look like. The model itself comes with handy instructions which not only show you where all of those extra detailing parts go, but also handy maintenance for oiling schedules, as well as, more importantly, how to get the body off the model and to fit the DCC decoder. In this instance, it really couldn't be simpler. What you need to do first is get your flathead screwdriver and then locate the front coupling, slide the flathead screwdriver underneath. I usually then place a thumb on top and then very gently lever the whole assembly up and out. You'll then see that this exposes a single screw underneath. We don't need to take the back coupling off. We now go to the crosshead jeweler's screwdriver, and then we've got two screws to undo. This one at the front, and then we're looking to this one in this recess here. Just very gently undo that, grasping the model by the wheels and the tank sides. You can then just lift the entire chassis clear of the model. What you can see here now is we've got the motor in the boiler barrel. We leave that well alone, and this here is the blanking plate. With Next 18 it really is easy. We don't need any special tools. Just very carefully hook a nail underneath one end and just lift, and you'll feel it just pop clear. And it's as simple as that, no tools required. Put that to one side, and you can see that Next 18 socket there. They really are quite fine, but it's actually probably one of the simplest DCC decoder setups to be able to plug your new decoder into. Taking the Next 18 decoder, if we look here, what we need to do is just spin that over, and you can see the corresponding male Next 18 decoder socket on there. What we're looking to do is to line that up with the socket, placing the decoder over the socket. You can feel when it's roughly in position, and then firmly but gently just rock it down, and you'll feel it click into place, and then it'll be in nice and firm, And with the train-o-matic decoder, you can see there which way round the QC fits, and then you know you've got it in the right place and the right way round. And then it's simply a case of putting the body back on top, slides in really easily. Both screws are exactly the same type, so you don't have to worry about which one went where. It's just a case of gently screw in until you feel a slight resistance. I always say don't over screw this in. If you feel like it doesn't want to spin freely, it probably means you're cross-threading it, so take it out and try again. The screws should always just go in with no real effort required, and they'll just screw in until you feel resistance, and that's when you need to stop. The coupling then line up, push down, and the model is fully DCC fitted. It's as easy as that. So we turn now to the scores. First up is build quality, and actually this is a really nice robust model. I have to say that there's no real qualms with it, and any of the fiddly bits such as lamp irons and those handrails do stay put and have managed to survive all of my heavy handling. So overall I'm pretty happy with that. There is just one area which I did spot, which I guess this livery is probably most cruel with, and that is the gap along the bottom of the boiler barrel, which is where the top of the body moves away from the chassis to be able to dismantle the model for DCC fitting. But I suppose it's a necessary evil, and it is a little bit difficult to see how they could do it any other way. I'd like to point out that if you get any of the NER or BR liveries, that really isn't going to be anywhere quite as noticeable, and it's really only this light lime green that really does accentuate that. So I'm going to give this a 9.2. When it came to running quality, the model actually performed pretty well. I was initially concerned that pickup on one of the wheels might have affected the model, but I ran it as I found it, so I didn't adjust that before I put it on the track, just to see how well it would perform. And actually, it didn't perturb it at all in the slightest. One thing that I did find though was that out of the box, the mechanism could be just a little bit growly. And I found myself lubricating all of the gear chain in there and the locomotive motor bearings just to make sure, and even then it's still quite a noisy model, and I can't quite decide whether that's the design of the motor that's doing that or whether I've just got a noisy example. I'm guessing that it will probably improve over time, but again, I review them as I find them, and out of the box there was just a little bit of noise, but it didn't seem to affect the locomotive's running. On the gradients, as we've mentioned before, the locomotive did manage all of the gradients on wear yard like locomotive, but it did start to lose traction when I started to increase that train on the 5% rise around the radius 1 curves. But that really is a challenge, and very few locomotives manage anything more than a handful of wagons on that particular bit of the test track. So overall, I'm going to give this an 8.9. On DCC fitting and innovation, well, for me, this was a really easy DCC fit. It's also quite apparent that there's a generous amount of space inside this model, despite the fact that plenty of extra ballast is in there to give this model some reasonable adhesive weight. Putting the Next 18 decoder in is really so simple, and it's interesting to see that the Next 18 interface really has come into its own. I believe that it was primarily intended for N-gauge models, but it does seem to have found a niche in some of the smaller 00 models where it really does make DCC fitting a joy and really easy. There was no need to remove any of the brake rigging, and with just 2 screws to undo, the model didn't try and fight the dismantling process and none of the detailing parts fell off. So I'm going to give this a 9.9. In terms of accuracy and quality of finish, well, the accuracy really is good. And for the most part, I felt that all of that lining and this really nice lime green Northeastern Railway livery has been really well applied. What really let the model down, though, was the paint that was just kind of lifting around the bosses on the wheels. And I just thought that this was an area that was a little bit disappointing, a bit like the model hadn't quite been fully clean when it had been painted, and that had stopped the paint from adhering properly to the model. So I'm going to give this an 8.0. On value for money, the locomotive does score really well in my mind. You can get these for just a shade over £100, and we do have that affiliate link down below to help you out to find where you can get these from. You don't pay that much of a premium for this really quite ornate livery, and when we're seeing some of the older models in other manufacturers' catalogues coming out at a price that is pushing £200 for a small shunting locomotive of comparable size to this, when you're getting this for, well, around £80 less, then I think it does offer some exceptionally good value for money in these rather expensive times. So I'm happy to give this a 9.0 out of 10. And that gives us an overall score of a very respectable 45. For me, this really was a timely upgrade of the old mainline classic that had persisted into the Bachmann range. It was long overdue, and actually Bachmann have done a really great job when I guess it would have been quite easy to retain the old locomotive body and just provide an upgraded chassis. Bachmann chose not to take the easy route, and the model as a result really is a must for any collection. Well, I hope you've really enjoyed today's video as much as I've thoroughly enjoyed filming it. Do you agree with my prognosis on this model? I always love to hear from you, and particularly if this is a model that you've got and you want to share your experiences of it, or is this a model that is very much on your radar? Or alternatively, do you not agree with what I've said? And again, I'd love to hear from you. Have you spotted something that I haven't? And of course, a big thank you to all the Patreons who made today's video possible. Like I always say, I couldn't do this without the generosity of you guys. So this model is dedicated to you. And if you want to help support the channel through Patreon, then we've got a link for that as well in the description box down below. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying you take great care of yourself. Until next time, happy modelling. Bye for now. Today's video is sponsored by Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders designed to be fully compatible with every manufacturer's locomotive. Visit train-o-matic.com to browse the full range and see what they've got suitable for you. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Offshore Allen, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky107107, George Botterini, Chris Moss, Robert Steers, MD of San Juan Model Company and Grantline Products, Sam Yates, Dale Williams, John N. from NC, NYMRish, Jonathan Foster, Peter, Clifford Ison, Larry W. Grant, NI Railways 4000 class, Ian Coulson, and Alan Dickerson. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.